Morning, everyone. Many thanks for coming. Many thanks also for those who are watching us by streaming. And I'm very happy not only for this discussion, this debate, but because we are launching Stefano Quintarelli book today. The official launching will be tomorrow at CGI. I'll talk about this in a moment. I first met Stefano Quintarelli in a seminar organized by Jeffrey Sachs at the Pontifical Academy of Social Science. At this occasion, a group of about 10, 15 people working in issues concerning the impact of digital revolution in social life has been formed with people coming from US, Austria, Germany, Italy, Israel, and Swiss. In Taiwan, yes, and Taiwan, yes, yeah, in Brazil. Actually, there has been 2 meetings, one on market, state, and civil society, and after a second meeting on the impacts of digital revolution. This group is actually presently alive, and both Quintarelli and we are part of this group. As you may suppose, this group reflects the generalized disenchantment with the journey internet has assumed, not only by its economic and cultural destructive impacts, but also by its political influence in social life. Let me tell you that today I published in Valor Econômico an article on this issue. In my view, Stefano's book is important, as Rafael Zanata and I wrote in the introduction to the Brazilian edition, as a kind of antidote against this dystopian perspective. I will not read Stefano's biography, which is in our invitation online, but let me stress 3 dimensions of his activities very related to the content of his book and of our discussion this morning, and why it justified this, the non-dystopian perspective of the thinking of Stefano Quintarelli. First, Stefano is an entrepreneur. He's a pioneer of the internet in Italy. His knowledge about the challenge present by what he calls the material dimension is not only theoretical. He knows by practice what about his talking. Second, Stefano has had until recently a parliamentary activity in Italy. He was deputy until very recently, by which he faced some of the powers that embodied the dystopian perspective of the internet. I hope he could mention his activity in Parliament today. Third, nowadays he belongs to some of the most ambitious organizations that within European Union are thinking and proposing policies about digital revolution and more specifically about artificial intelligence. Well, let me tell you also that I'm very happy, and the Institute of Advanced Studies of US very proud to receive here Demi Getchko. Demi is one of the pioneers of internet in Brazil. He's one of the fathers of Brazilian internet. He's known by this short name. He's an engineer with MS and PhD from the Polytechnic School of this university. He has worked as a teacher at Polytechnic School, and nowadays he's in the council of the Brazilian Internet Steering Committee, and he's a columnist in O Estado de São Paulo. But the most important about Demi, in my view, is that he is exactly what Tim Berners-Lee calls philosophical engineer. His reflection expressed in his column, in many papers, and in his blog shows it. Before giving the floor to Stefano and Demi, let me thank the organizations without whom we couldn't be here. Many thanks for the Institute of Advanced Studies of the University of São Paulo. I'd like to thank also the Technology and Equity Institute, which has been very important in supporting this translation and the edition of Stefano's book. Technology and Equity Institute is working with some of the main challenges that we will discuss here, and has published a very interesting report on misinformation in Brazilian electoral process. I'm very grateful to the Brazilian Internet Steering Committee, especially to Bruno Bioni and Demi, for their support for this meeting and the coming of Stefano to Brazil. And thanks also for Editora Elefante, which is publishing some important titles on our discussion, as Tom Slees Against the Sharing Economy and Treble Short's Platform Cooperative. Many thanks. Stefano, please.
Well, thank you. Bom dia. Meu português não dá para falar para toda a conferência. I'm going to speak in English, sorry. Although I understand Portuguese and I've been in Brazil several times in the last decades, I must say. I'm so happy to be here. I'm so grateful for all of you, for Bruno Bioni and Demi and all University of Sao Paulo and CGI. I mean, I'm so grateful for having me here. And I think it's beautiful. I mean, you did a fantastic job. Thank you very, very much. Well, you know, I have so many things to say that I really don't know how to start. But in any case, I prepared some slides that go through the book. I think that I have to speak for about 40 minutes or so. Okay, so let me first start by saying why I wrote the book. As was mentioned previously, I have been in the past legislature and in the Italian parliament. I'm not a politician, I'm an entrepreneur. I started the first ISP in Italy. I listed it into the stock market, and then I made some startups, and I exited the company. And then in 2013, the then Prime Minister of Italy, Mario Monti, has decided that he wanted to run with a new party, which was called the Civic Choice, and he asked me to join. And after discussing a little bit with him, I said, okay, I'm okay. I mean, I think that we need to bring technology and the development of technology and the impact on society in a debate in the parliament. So it's okay, I will run. And then I entered the parliament. What happened was that the party that I was elected in, Civic Choice, broke up minutes after entering the parliament, exploded, because it was basically formed by different parties coming together just to get back to the parliament. I had a terrible car accident at the beginning of the legislature. I stayed for a number of months in the hospital, and when I finally arrived to the parliament, the party almost did not exist anymore. And so I needed to find out ways to try to make an impact about these topics that are at the heart of my work. And I founded the Parliamentary Intergroup for Technological Innovation. And this was quite a success, I must say. More than 100 members of the parliament belonged to this intergroup, and we had monthly workshops on specific topics with them. So basically, we were able to bring in academics, entrepreneurs, etc., to explain, to tell these members of the parliament things, how technology impacts on society and economy. We had an impact. Of course, I would have preferred that we had a greater impact. We approved the resolution, which was basically, you know that well, I don't know if you're familiar with these things, but in Tunis, it was proposed an Internet Bill of Rights back when was it? In the late 80s, I think, early 90s. No, late 90s. Okay, and I proposed we worked with a committee of members of the parliament and persons from the civil society. We worked on a resolution, and we approved the resolution on a Charter Bill of Rights, a Charter of Rights, an Internet Bill of Rights that we approved with unanimity in the parliament. And it bears my name, so I'm very proud of it. I would have preferred that it turned into bits of more strong legislation, but in any case, I must admit it's a first step. When I came back to the parliament, so noticing that my party was not there, I built this intergroup, and it was so evident that we had perhaps 60-70% of the members of the parliament are lawyers. I have nothing against lawyers. I mean, if I would be born again, perhaps I would study law, but they really don't know how technology really relates to their work and with society. And so I decided to write a book, and I wrote the book thinking on how to explain complex things to somebody that has nothing to do with technology, but putting all pieces together so that they can get a framework or a holistic view of the things. And I gave it to each member of the parliament in Italy. So 970 copies that I bought and gave to the members of the parliament. The book did quite well, and I am so grateful that now it's published. This is the second edition, of course, updated, that is published here in Brazil. But this is how the book was born and how it was intended, just to give a holistic view of how things are happening, and trying not to follow the normal way how press and lobbies tend to present or represent how things are evolving. Okay, it was quite a success. So let me start to tell you about some contents about the book. First of all, I don't like the word virtual, because everybody talks about, we were discussing now about cyberspace, and I think I never used the word cyberspace in the book, but and neither I like the word virtual, because virtual is a word that comes from Latin, from virtualis, in late Latin, medieval Latin, and has a meaning that it is not real, it is potential. Something that it is potential, that it's not real, is virtual. And so when we talk about virtual, I mean, it's very clear when we are building virtual reality, so you use helmets and you get presented and you act in an environment that does not exist, that it's virtual. But for the rest of the application of technologies, there is nothing virtual with it. I mean, it's not material, but it's not virtual. Like the money in your bank accounts is very real. It's not virtual. It's very real. It's not material. This is why I talk about material and immaterial. And this is really the core foundation of the book, the distinction between material and immaterial. And my position is that immaterial is a recently born dimension of our existence. So the there are some trends that have exponential growth that we know very well. I mean, you are a well-formed audience, so I'm not going to go too much in depth on these issues, but just to say that the computational power, the ability to connect and to exchange data, input, output, and the ability to store information. These are the three major developments that are shaping how computers are entering our society. So a computer is basically made up of three things: computing power, storage power, and communication, I/O, input, output power. And all these things are growing exponentially. And this is changing some parts of the landscape. I work, as I was mentioned before, I'm a part of the high-level expert group on artificial intelligence of the European Commission. And there is a lot of effort and interest about artificial intelligence. And it was one of my interests in the academy when I was in the university in the late 80s. And I must say that we have developed a lot, but not as in other parts of technology. But basically, what makes really the difference now is that we can grab data because the systems are interconnected, and we can grab data. We can store a lot of data thanks to storage, and we can do a number of computation that is staggering. I mean, it's absolutely outstanding thanks to the computing power. So artificial intelligence in the end is the byproduct of the growth of the possibility of computation on this amount of big data that is the byproduct of the exponential increase of data storage, and the fact that everything is interconnected and that we can acquire the data. So these are the three major trends. About exponential, just a quick note. Exponential trends, when you pass a threshold, and if you look outside and you don't see anything, it does not mean that something is not happening. Because once you notice it, if the trend is exponential, it's too late. Things have already happened. This is particularly difficult for politicians, for politics, because once they notice something, it's very difficult to try to correct it, because the phenomenon, it has already exploded. Think, for example, scooters. I've seen that you have scooters here now in Sao Paulo, no? The electric scooters. Trying to put the scooters back, it's very difficult once you have perhaps 4 companies or 3 companies competing and inundating the cities with scooters, etc. But scooters are dangerous for those who ride, and they're dangerous for those that you eventually crash against. And there are some cities around the world that now are trying to push back on scooters. Then the same goes for Uber, and the same goes for all these transformations. Once politics come to deal with these issues, it's very, very late, and it's more difficult to make it, to try to govern these things. This is a picture of a 12-year-old girl, and the reason why I'm using this picture is because, I mean, if I talk about a 12-year-old girl, we know, all of us know a 12-year-old girl, and we can remember very well when she was born, and now she's going into primary. We can remember very well her life, and it's really a small portion of her life. But in these 12 years, since Android was made, the first mobile phones with Android were made, more than twice the population of Europe and North America together daily use Android devices. So it really is a glimpse of an eye in the history of humankind, but it's something that is growing with a dramatic pace. I mean, it's very, very fast. And this has changed how we do things and how we interact, as I'm going to explain a little bit more. What has happened in these years? Well, these are data about Europe, and I don't have data about Brazil, sorry, but it's quite interesting that in the active age population, basically in these 12 years, everybody uses the internet. So mobile phones that are the byproduct of so we have research in the basic electronics, then we have applied electronics, and we have increases in in the computational power, in the storage, and in the communication, and then eventually we end up with mobile phones in our pockets. These mobile phones that have been born really in the time that a girl goes from birth to second degree in primary, in this short amount of time, almost everybody in the active age ages in Europe, everybody uses the internet. I'm sure that, Demi, when did you start? Yeah, 88. Yeah, in 88, I remember when I started at my ISP in 1994. There were a count of about 30,000 users worldwide. Okay, just to give you an idea, the mobile phone is what really democratized the access to the internet. Everybody uses the internet after the mobile phones. And in no time, in 12 years, it has reached 100% of the population. 100% of the population that stays online the whole day. Fact is that you stay online even when you don't know, but asking people, how frequently do you use the internet? The figure is consistent. About 90%, 85% of them across Europe says multiple times per day or the whole day. Effectively, they stay on the whole day, but they don't know. And this is happening in such a short time frame. And once it has passed the threshold and the thing has been noticed, it was too late. This was a cover of Forbes in, I don't remember the year, 2002, probably, 2007. And he says, 1 billion customers of Nokia. So it's very, very difficult. Once you notice that the fact is happening, the company has already been blown away. All the manufacturers that produced mobile phones in the past do not exist anymore. This is the picture, you probably have seen it, of the election of the Pope in 2005 and 2013. You can see here there is a mobile phone. There is somebody, in the upper picture, there is one mobile phone on somebody taking. It may be a NEC, or Motorola, or Nokia, but none of these companies exist anymore because of this wave of exponential development. And this is a clear usage how people use the internet. They use it for social relationships, just to store things. And another really important motivation for the use of the internet is having economic relationship. And this is pretty outstanding because we see that 90% of the internet users, so we have 95% of the population uses the internet and the active age band, and of them, 90% uses to have economic relationships. So and that has happened in only 12 years, from 0 to 12 years. And this has been developed thanks to a particular soft regulation we had. And it was a decision, really. We have a lot of regulation. It's not true that we don't have regulation about the internet. We always had regulation because normal laws apply, but specific laws for competition laws, we decided back in the late 80s when we were thinking about, so let me go back 1 second. The development of the internet was followed the decision to favor the development of what was called at the time the information society. We don't talk about the information society anymore, but if you go back to the 90s, you can recall that the hot discussion was about information society. Why? Because, wisely, we cannot think of the development of the world economy, of the world based on an economy that is only material, where you use concrete and steel and you put a lot of strain on the planet. So it was very smart to focus on developing the information society. And it was a political decision that has been nurtured in the OECD and in WTO and international organization to favor the development of the information society, not putting too much regulatory burden. And we decided to open up telecommunication services for competition, which was something that was not, I don't know when that happened here in Brazil. In Italy, in Europe, it happened in 1992 with the Open Network Directive. It was the start of the competition in telecommunication services. So we decided that we wanted to have a light regulation on these things because we wanted to generate, to foster a strong development of the information society. And we imposed asymmetric regulations on traditional players, on traditional telecommunication operators, on traditional broadcaster and publisher, etc., because we wanted to favor the information society. This is what has happened in the 90s. So the tipping point was caused by smartphones, and in 12 years, everybody is connected. It's always connected. They are always connected. Persons hold social and economic relationships, and this has happened thanks to favorable regulation. Now, and this is the core of my book, and it's my point of view on these things. I don't like to talk about virtual because it's real, and I don't like to talk about the immaterial dimension as a separate world. Sometimes you hear talking about the internet as a different world that's different from the real world. Well, this is terrible because everything is real and they are not separate worlds. It's just, it's all the same thing. They are tied together, and that's why I call them dimensions, because length is not alternative to depth. Okay, length is not alternative to depth. They give 2 dimensions to reality. So what was happening in the last 12 years is that prominently, one of the dimensions of the world, the immaterial dimension, has grown exponentially. Okay, so now we need to look at reality not only by its material dimension, but also looking at its immaterial dimension. But as it happens, I mean, it's very, very simple, but all these properties are very simple if you look at each of them. But if you look at it in a list and you try to think at the implication, it's quite, I mean, you need to think twice about these things. Because the properties of the material dimension and the properties of the immaterial dimension are completely different. So in the material dimension, producing the first thing, producing the first glass, costs a lot of money. You need to try things, you need to do models, you need to test it, etc. Once you have produced the first copy, the first issue, the first object, reproducing it has significant variable costs. Storing it it's costly, costs a lot of money. You need to have warehouses, etc. Moving it around, transferring it, costs a lot of money because you need to have trucks and things and drivers and all this person moving it, and it requires time. And the manipulation of material things is done by humans. Yes, there are robots, but generally humans that work on shifts. Now, if you look at the for example, I'm a player. I love to play Scrabble. You know, the game with the tiles and the words, etc. So I used to have different Scrabbles. I had 2 in plastic and 1 in wood. Very, very nice things, very, very beautiful. If you are the Mattel who is producing Scrabble, you need to buy the inputs, you need to test it, you need to say, okay, this letter weighs 8 points, this one weighs 10. Once you have decided the product, then you start making it, and you have variable products, and then you have environmental controls, and people working in shifts, and unions, and labor condition, and all these things. You can understand. And then if you want to sell it for Christmas, you need to start 5 months in advance, having people going to ask the retail stores how many they want for Christmas, and you have the agents, and you have all the organization, the geographic multi-level organization to reach the stores. But I now play Scrabble online, and I play with an app made by a company of 2 guys. One is Spanish and one is from Argentina, from Buenos Aires. and they have more than 100 million euros in revenues the last time I looked, and there are 30 people, and once they have produced the software for the first Scrabble, producing the first Scrabble costs something, but not as much as producing the first Scrabble of the wooden equivalent or the leather equivalent, etc. And reproducing has zero marginal cost. They have no storage cost. The cost is nil. The marginal cost of storage is nil. It does not require time, and it does not cost money to move it around from one part of the world to the other. And the manipulation is done by the store. So basically, the online store is the one who sells it, and the customer care is then via an application, etc. And they run it 24 hours a day, 360 days a year. So this is very clear that there are major differences. And if the digital Scrabble, the immaterial Scrabble, competes against the material Scrabble, well, it's evident that the material Scrabble is going to suffer because of this, because of these differences. It's not only things that are completely replaced. The immaterial Scrabble completely replaces the material Scrabble, putting in some new features. I play Scrabble with people around the world, but also things, think for example to airplane transportation. Airplane transportation is moving atoms from one part of the world to the other. Okay, it's moving atoms around. But the service of air transportation includes the ticketing and the check-in and the controls, etc. And think how that has changed. I remember when I grew up in Colombia. My father was the director of the Italian school in Bogota. And I remember when we had these price lists published by IATA. I don't know if you remember the price lists of the books, very, very big books. And you went to the travel agent and you say, I want to go from Bogota to Milan. And they were looking at the various legs possible and the various times. They say, okay, you can go on this day, on that day. Then you have to wait for 6 hours in Puerto Rico. And this is going to be a little cheaper, etc. And the good travel agent was one that knew perfectly all the possible combinations. And all these prices and schedules were defined 1 year in advance by the company. The effect of this is that planes were almost always empty, and you could sleep in the 4 middle seats. Now, fast forward, and not using IATA books anymore, so dematerializing the material part of the product of the air transportation that was possible to dematerialize, which is mostly a commercial relationship, you obtain that you have a higher occupancy, you can fly to smaller airports, and because you have the internet, it is connected, and etc. And prices have dropped dramatically. And the increase of movement of people has increased a lot. So this is a part that, just to give you a sense that based on the different properties of the immaterial dimension, we could dematerialize the selling of the ticket. You remember, you had to go to the travel agent, and the travel agent would order the ticket, and the ticket would come in after 1 month because it needed to be printed in Italy, and then shipped to Bogota, and then to the travel agent. Okay. So dematerializing this part, moving it from material to the immaterial dimension, has completely changed the industry. I could give you a lot of examples really on this. Another of my favorite examples is the Brembo. I don't know if you know Brembo. Brembo is the company that manufactures brakes for the car. So basically it's steel. It's, okay, fonderia. I don't know how to say fonderia. Foundries, okay. So it's the most material thing you can imagine. But knowing how much steel, how much iron they have to put in the brake, and when it's going to destroy, to break up, and all this, the research that is correlated to this is something that now is done by cars thanks to the sensors they have in the car, and that is collected and transmitted to the center of Brembo. Brembo, I think, has two plants here in Brazil. They provide the brakes for Volkswagen, Mercedes, Fiat, for all major brands. Okay, and even them, they are able to significantly optimize their business and reduce significantly the costs and have a lower impact on the environment thanks to the fact of exploiting the different properties in the material dimension. So I just gave you three examples. One that is Scrabble, that is completely replaced. The immaterial dimension completely replaces the material one, and the other two, the air flight and the air passage and the brakes, that somehow are the material part complements and supplements the material one. But in any example, really, you can in any work condition, social condition, you can build on these major differences. Another very important difference is that the material dimension is rival and excludable, while the immaterial dimension is not rival and generally is not excludable. Rival means that this book, either I have it or Ricardo has it, and excludable means that if Demi comes and takes away the book away from us, neither I nor Ricardo can use it. This is the basis of the private property, of the concept of the private property. Private property is enabled by the fact that material goods are rival and excludable. The whole civil law, the whole law systems are built on the fact that private goods, that goods can be private, and private goods are rival and excludable. And information, as such, is not rival. There is a famous sentence by Jefferson: the person who lights his candle to mine he gets light himself without diminishing mine. The idea is that information can be shared and it's not rival. All of us can benefit from the same information, from the same immaterial dimension at the same time. So now the point is, what is property? And how do we enforce this new kind of property in the immaterial dimension? It's very complicated. When you buy something, my older daughter, Chiara, she loved the books of Harry Potter. And she had a best friend, and she was always lending her books after she finished to her best friend. And the last book of Harry Potter that I bought her as an e-book. And then she asked me, how can I share this after I finish reading with my friend? And I say, you can't, it's a crime. And how can you explain to a 13-year-old girl that if she lends a book, a material one, to somebody, that's a good thing to do, and if she does the same with an immaterial one, that's a crime? I mean, it's complicated. Because it's not private. Because really we don't buy anything online in the immaterial dimension. There is no private property, and this is a big issue about data and privacy, of course, no, because data is not rival and it's not excludable so far. So we are redefining some categories, and we are introduced, and then as a property gets redefined, you never buy anything. You enter into a service contract with somebody, and this somebody is significantly stronger than the citizen and than the user. And then, so you need to have regulation coming in to try to defend and protect the weaker part in the negotiation. And of course, this needs that politician understand the whole thing and what is happening. So it's not the same. Things are changing. The words are changing their meaning. You don't buy a book. You don't buy a movie. You don't buy a song. You just use it. And you are giving away a lot of the traditional rights and privileges that were associated with property. Then I'm not going to enter too much into the details of this, and then I'm going to move faster. But a last point is that the material dimension is disconnected while the immaterial dimension is connected. And this has a lot of implications about about privacy as well, because if something is connected, you can gather the data, and data is not rival, and everybody has it. It's very complicated. If it's connected, you can take, for example, I don't know, any product. You test it on the market, you do a customer survey, you do a focus group, you get feedback, you come back, you re-engineer your product, you try to change your service, you get back to the users, you see how it's behaving, you get better, and you can do this, and in the material dimension, you can do this perhaps every couple of months. While in the immaterial dimension, you can do it in real time, and you can run thousands of tests simultaneously. Microsoft and Amazon, and I mean everybody really, do A/B testing continuously. They provide half of the user a version and half of the user another version, and they see the differences, and this version is performing 2% better, and so that gets read out, and this kind of accelerates the feedback from the consumers, from the citizens, and allows for a more targeted provision of services. I'm going to come back on this later. So the difference when you move away from something that has been always material and you start to make it immaterial are profound. One of the major consequences that we see is that a traditional organization that was based on a geographic intermediation of some kind, be it the airline with the branch office in Sao Paulo or Porto Alegre, and then the travel agents, gets substituted and replaced by a central organization that maintains the relationship, be it the political party with the state office and the local sections, be it any the Mattel with the warehouses and the stores, compared to the one that provide things from the center. So it's not really a disintermediation. I don't like the word disintermediation. It's a re-intermediation of the relationship by or via an algorithm. So it's an algorithmic re-intermediation that is happening. And it's replacing the geographic-based intermediation that we were used to. Another thing I already somehow mentioned is that given that we don't have these frictions in the material, given that we don't have this friction in the material that we have in the material dimension, feedbacks are much, much faster, and we can adopt much faster. And now the issue is the provider of the service adapts very quickly. Sometimes the whole of the society needs longer times to adapt. Then, given that the immaterial dimension is connected, given that transferring does not require time and it does not cost, has a zero marginal cost, and that processing the information has a zero marginal cost, what I can do, we used to have targets of people that were made by, I mean, if you have to reach people in a material way, take for example newspapers, you can have different kind of newspapers. You have a magazine for horse riders, a magazine for people engaged with politics, a magazine for people interested to health or whatever. If you are interested in reaching somebody that is interested with health, you publish your advertisement on the healthcare magazine. But now, and you have a very rough segmentation of the users. Given that the material dimension is connected, you can target things to the single specific user. This has profound implications. And you have feedback because it's connected in real time and zero marginal cost. So we grew up with the idea of mass media, but mass media is becoming a massively personalized media. There was a referendum in Italy to change the constitution run by our Prime Minister Matteo Renzi. And he was convinced that he would win the referendum. And he lost. And he was convinced because all he could see in social networks it were people that were really fantastic, enthusiastic about the referendum. But that's because the algorithm just provided him that view, and not the view of all the people who were against it, because it was not a mass media, it was a massively personalized media. So a different media for every person. We could arrive to the degree of personalization. If I have a perfect knowledge of my target, and I know that he is interested in that specific item, and his ability to spend is a determined one, and if Ricardo does not have this information, he's not going to be able to compete against me in providing that service to the person. And as soon as he realized that I have a perfect knowledge of the consumers and he does not, he would eventually not even try to compete. And if you think about it, what we are seeing now is that you are not competing in the markets, but we are competing for the markets. Because once you compete in the market and you grab once you compete for the market and you grab the whole market, be it the search engine, the transportation, the scooters or whatever, once you have a perfect knowledge of your consumers, somebody trying to enter will not be able to compete against you. So the mass personalization allowed by the different properties of the material dimension is very important. Another important point is that the world becomes a point. Everything is available always from anywhere. And that means that we compete in the material dimension with anybody from any part of the world, and that jobs can be relocalized. Immaterial-based jobs can be relocalized. This has huge impacts on the perimeters of the companies. In my company, in the late 90s, we dematerialized the customer's dossier. Late 90s, I mean, it seems absurd, but everybody had things on paper. We dematerialized that, and we had a call center, the first call center outside of Italy, in Romania. Why? Because there was a fiber optic from Milan to Romania, and we hired people in a university of Romania, people who studied Italian, and we put a CRM call center there. And this dematerialization and the fact that time and the cost of transferring information is nil allow us to do so. And so think of all the reshoring now. Okay, you got the idea. Another major consequence is that the reducing cost of electronics makes it more pervasive. When Demi and I started with these things back in the late 80s, all the intelligence was in the center, and you have dumb periphery, be it the telephone, be it whatever. I mean, the intelligence was at the center. Now the intelligence is spread across the whole dimension, and this is going to grow. This pervasiveness of electronics is going to grow significantly. I spent too much time on this, but I'm going to go faster on the next slides. So the immaterial obeys different rules than the material. The consequences are immaterial intermediaries, algorithmic intermediaries, acceleration of the trends, targets of one, concentration of the world, and pervasiveness. These are consequences of the development of the immaterial dimensions thanks to the development of electronics, mobile phones, blah, blah, blah. What has happened in the last 12 years is that we are very used to live in a material world since 10,000 years in a material dimension, and in the last 12 years, the material dimension has been enriched by an immaterial dimension that has become the major user interface for social and economic relationships of persons. So the immaterial dimension is, for everybody, for most of us, and it will be for everybody, the user interface to the material dimension for interpersonal, social, and economic relationship. Now, I don't want to evade the big topics. There are big topics. Self-driving cars, we know that nobody is going to drive anymore, hyper-intelligence, machines so intelligent that we will not understand, artificial consciousness, the fact that we are not going to work, the event of singularity when our intelligence will expand to the bound of the universe. I tend not to be concerned about these issues because the Semiconductors Industry Association, which is the association of the manufacturer of chips, of semiconductors, has a roadmap for all the manufacturers that is called International Technology Roadmap for Semiconductors that has anticipated the end of the so-called 2D domain to 2021. So we know that electronics will not shrink any further after 2021. In 2021, we're going to reach the limit in the shrinking of the electronics, and so in the possibility of the reduction of the increase of power at the same cost. So we are not going to be able to have chips at the same cost that perform significantly higher. So it's going to determine an increment in cost. But for those technologies that we have already matured, those will shrink in costs. So we are not going to be able to say that for $1 we buy X number of transistors. But those transistors we buy, we're going to buy for much less than $1. And this is going to be pervasive. This will increase the pervasiveness because being the competition not possible to, very difficultly possible to be on performances, the competition will be on pricing of existing technology. This means that we are going to see consolidations in the electronic industry, and we are going to see a pervasiveness of electronics in everything, from that can to the water machine, to this table, to this chair, to my sunglasses. As a matter of fact, my sunglasses already, my glasses here already have a chip in it, a computer in it. And furthermore, it's going to be in lamps, it's going to be in the power socket. We're going to have computers everywhere in the coming years. And we are going to interact with these machines. We already start, when we talk about computers, we think about these devices. We don't always even think about mobile phones. We think about these devices. Fact is that computer is going to be all around us. Our computations do not happen in our computer, happen elsewhere. And we don't know where, happens anywhere in the world, because the material dimension compresses the world to one point. Okay, our computation happens there. Our data sits there because it's connected and it's not rival. So basically, we are going to have our computer all around us. Now, these are actual slides that I took from a presentation for a company that I know. You know, there are LED lamps, LED lamps, no? And now that you can control the lamps with a smartphone, with a Bluetooth connection. Okay, this is going to change. There is a similar thing to Android, which is called Thread by Google, and it's a company that wants to develop, it's a consortium that promotes the development of an open source standard for wireless meshed networks. And everybody is joining, I mean, from Siemens to Philips to Samsung, everybody is joining that consortium, like has happened for Android. And the idea is that you are going to have, when you put on a light bulb, that immediately will configure itself as a part of the network, will discover its peers, and will build the network, and it will extend the network. And the same will happen with my sunglasses, my glasses, with the power socket, with the table, etc. And all is being connected to. And now there are companies that are working on these protocols to put in microphones and speakers. So this is going to become part of the fabric of our life. Homes, offices, computers are going to be all around us, and it's going to be connected to the internet and to the cloud, and we are going to access, through this interface, we're going to access service. So we are going to basically live inside of a computer. We are going to live inside of a computer. And the key asset for this is the identity of the user. When I was in the parliament, I proposed the law, and now we have a system. I proposed a law for a digital identity guaranteed by the state. And now we have this system, and we have about 3.5 million Italians that have a digital identity. The actual service is provided by private companies, a number of them, so you can choose, so data is not concentrated, and there are a number of privacy by design provisions in the system, but the identity is guaranteed by the state, because identity is the most extreme competitive asset in this scenario. Now, when we talk, The air does not discriminate. Whatever I say, you hear it, and everyone in this room and those who are listening in streaming can have the same content. But when you come into the immaterial dimension, there are a number of intermediaries, of layers of intermediation. I'm spending too much time, I know. That's the application, the operating system, the hardware, and the network. We are very familiar with the concept of network neutrality. Your control of the network should not be used in order to alter markets or the social or the requirements of the individuals. If you inform yourself or you buy something or you have just social relationships, I mean, the network must not interfere. But the fact is that this machine, we tend to think of computers as enablers, and instead they are become, by the day, more and more intermediaries. They intermediate the flow, and they tend to extract value from the flow. So basically, they are becoming gatekeepers in our access to the material dimension. Controlling the gateway to the material dimension is controlling the user interface to the material dimension. Now, I'm not going to go too much deep on this, but let's say controlling the communications of the people, of companies, how they interact socially, etc., is something that you notice somehow. But now you cannot even notice when this is happening. This is very difficult because things that are immaterial, we don't, while the material dimension, we can grasp it with our senses, with our 5 senses, the immaterial we cannot grasp. Okay, I need to go faster. So let's think about the intermediaries, these intermediaries that intermediate, that are the gatekeeper of our access to the immaterial dimension, and the immaterial dimension is the user interface to the material dimension. These intermediaries control vertical online markets, also determining prices in the rest of the economy. I needed to buy a razor, and I looked it up online. I went to the shop, and then I ended up buying it online, and given that I'm subscribed to Amazon, I bought it on Amazon. They extract value from the intermediaries, both the producers and the users, from both sides, because they sit in the middle. For example, I don't know, Booking. When you look at the price on Booking, you know that Booking is extracting 20% of the value, which is basically the margin that the hotels had previously. In a material dimension, the way how hotels were promoted, now we have a significant increase in tourism, which is good, but we must also think that the intermediary, which tends to be a monopolist or an oligopolist, one or few entities, extract value from the producers of value, be it the workers or the capital. They govern market access to control of the platforms. You cannot install whatever you want on your iPhone. You can install whatever you want that Apple is accepting. And if Apple does not accept, there is no court to which you can refer to have it reinstated. You can go to an antitrust or competition regulation, and perhaps after 2 years, they say, okay, and you spend hundreds of thousands of dollars and then say, okay, you have the right. But you see the stronghold, it's imbalanced. Then they collect high intermediation fees. They benefit from network effects to reduce the cost of acquiring customers, and they benefit from lock-in that limit the contestability of users. Once you use a service, it's very difficult to move to another one. If you want to buy or sell something, you go to eBay, because everybody's on eBay, and we have a very strong lock-in there. If you want to chat with somebody, you chat with WhatsApp. If you install my chat application, you're not going to be able to chat with anybody else but me. They have a regulation that exempts from the responsibility to control the contents and the offer they propose. They can transfer margins from one country to another thanks to royalties on intellectual property. They do a tax shopping, choosing the place to pay less taxes and eroding the tax capacity of the states. This is all things related to the immaterial properties. They benefit from nearly infinite scale of economies, thanks to null marginal costs or null variable costs. They control the performance of the activities of the value producers, be it workers or companies, thanks to technological tools. They define working conditions for occasional relationships with a control that is far superior to the normal existing in traditional work. They unilaterally impose non-negotiable supply conditions to professional lenders of goods and services that they broker. They benefit from outsourcing and flexibility of relationship with various types of their collaborator, exploiting the porosity of the company perimeters determined by the computerization of the activities. They intermediate offers between non-professional operators that reduce the rights and protection of consumers. So when you think of Airbnb, for example, especially the most disadvantaged, because you have rules for handicapped people in hotels, but they don't have similar rules for handicapped people in houses that are privately rented through Airbnb, and you cannot have them. They influence the formation of market opinions thanks to algorithms that intermediate filter the information presented to users by wrapping them in filter bubbles, what I said before, not a target of one. They control access to the market of putative future competitors through contractual restriction, most favored nation clauses, for example. Thanks to the intrinsic property of immateriality, they escape from the traditional rights, duty, and privileges and immunities of private property, and they superimpose to the present law their contractual terms and conditions. They benefit from access to facilitated finance thanks to privileged access to the risk capital market, which eventually they are interconnected to. And I'm not going to speculate much on this. I'm concluding, what I say is that we used to have the Industrial Revolution, and we used to look at the world in terms of a conflict between capital and labor. And that was the conflict of the 18th and the 19th century. Now, this capital and labor, the producers of value, are being intermediated by the information. So what I think is that we are bringing into the equation another dimension, which is the information. It's not only capital and labor, it's also information. And the information is controlled by monopolistic or oligopolistic intermediaries based on the properties of the immaterial dimension, and these extract value from both the capital and the labor. If I grab 20% intermediation fee from a hotel, it's not only the hotel owner who puts in this 20%. Yes, it's the hotel owner, but in turn, that will put pressure on the hotel workers. So this, I think that the digital revolution is bringing a conflict, an emerging conflict in the 21st century between intermediaries and intermediated. What I call the info plutocrats versus capitalists and proletarians. And most of the value, if you look at the valuation of the companies, it's very obvious. The top 10 companies, 8 of them for market capitalization are information companies. And this has happened in 12 years, really. Okay, and if you look at them, their majority shareholder, all of them are in the top 5 or top 10 of the richest people in the world. And it does not have boundaries because the immaterial dimension makes the world a point, because transmitting and does not require time and does not cost money. So the traditional conflict used to be West against East, and now the conflict, I believe, is global. So, just to wrap up, we have basic research in physics that leads to electronics development, which leads to exponential trends in processing, storage, and communication, but we have different basic properties of material and immaterial that leads to some macro phenomena, immaterial intermediaries, events acceleration, targets of one, world concentration, and pervasiveness. Then we have a regulatory framework, and we have socioeconomic effects. My argument is that basic research is going on anywhere and you cannot stop it, you cannot uninvent things, and you cannot prevent things to be invented. Electronics development, given all the limits of the semiconductors industry, so I'm not talking long term about the future of work. When it's very, when you talk about these huge issues, like we are not going to have work, we are going to have super intelligence. De facto, it's like when you play football and you hit the ball very far away, so it takes a long time to come back. And you are not dealing with present issues that are present now and are going to be present and significant impact and having a significant impact on society for the next 20 years. Okay, so my point is that while these speculations, because they are speculations and they are based on an act of faith, I could go deeper on this, but are very interesting from a philosophical point of view, there are practical consequences in the next decades that we could tackle now, because all these things, immaterial intermediaries, event acceleration, monopolistic or oligopolistic, both sides on monopolistic or monopsonistic. Events acceleration, targets of one, work concentration and pervasiveness, all these things produce socioeconomic effects depending on the regulatory framework, on the regulation framework. All these things happen. The lever we have is the regulatory framework. And this is why I wrote the book for my fellow members of the parliament. It's very interesting. In your book, I just went very quickly through some part. You said you cannot look back because the 20th century is not guidance for the future. And this is a cover by the Fine Young Cannibals, which seemed to me very appropriate. Fine Young Cannibals. We have fine teenagers, young people that are heavily financed by venture capitalists, etc., because there are huge incentives to become monopolists, competing for the market and not in the market. Remember what I said before? That want to cannibalize any other business that we traditionally did in the material dimension. And so we cannot look back, because the past is not a guidance for the future. Not necessarily. I mean, if you go at the wisdom, yes, but for practical short-term things, it's not a guidance. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefano. As you can see, the book is at the same time very didactical, very introductory, but at the same time touching some of the main issues in the discussion on the relation between digital revolution and social life. But I will not speak just now, and Demi will comment the presentation and a little about the book.
Thank you. It's really a pleasure, piacere tenere Quintarelli con noi. It was a very provocative presentation. I have some specific points maybe to comment, maybe to make some kind of also provocation to go forward. First of all, the last comment about the philosophy. Yes, you prefer I speak Portuguese? Ok. You understand. Muito bem. Então, essa parte final em que ele comenta filosofia me lembrou trecho que eu inclusive copiei de artigo do famoso político chamado Henry Kissinger. Ele escreveu numa revista chamada Atlantic artigo que se chama O Fim da Era do Iluminismo, The End of Enlightenment Era, How the Enlightenment Ends. Eu peguei a frase aqui, que eu acho que bate mais ou menos o que foi dito aqui, eu acho que é um jeito de pensar em inteligência artificial, por exemplo, e ele diz o seguinte, que o iluminismo começou com, essentially, eu vou ler em inglês aqui, the Enlightenment started with an essentially philosophical insight spread by a new technology. Our period, nossa época atualmente, is moving in the opposite direction. It had generated a potentially dominating technology in search of a guiding philosophy. Isso é mais ou menos o dilema da ética sobre, digamos, inteligência artificial, e foi muito bem tocado pelo Quintarelli. Um outro ponto que eu acho que estou totalmente de acordo é essa parte da semântica. Eu disse algumas vezes que eu acho que as palavras têm uma semântica e tendem a se vingar do mau uso que fazemos dela. Por exemplo, a palavra cyber, que eu comentei antes de começar, foi cunhada, foi inventada a palavra cybernetics, ou cybernetics, pelo Norbert Wiener, em 1948, que era um pesquisador famoso da área nos Estados Unidos. E cybernetics tem uma raiz grega que significa controle, governo, né? Cibernética é a teoria de controle e comunicação de animais e homens. Esse é o nome do livro do Wiener. A gente está usando cyber ou cyber de uma forma aberta e livre, como uma coisa etérea do espaço do éter, né? E, na verdade, tem a ver com controle. Então, eu estava discutindo uma vez com o Windsurf, que esse de fato é um dos pais, eu falei, vocês estão chamando... Ele falou, não, todo espaço agora será cyber. Eu falei, acho que é uma péssima ideia. Se todo espaço for cyber, todo espaço agora vai ser de controle. Acho que nós estamos indo na direção errada de novo. Então, precisa tomar cuidado com as palavras, porque elas se vingam. Acho que é essa mesma bela discussão entre virtual e imaterial. Eu acho que são batalhas perdidas, todo mundo vai usar cyber e todo mundo vai usar virtual, mas não custa ter um pé atrás e lembrar dessas coisas aí. Então, em relação ao que foi apresentado, que eu acho extremamente interessante, eu farei alguns comentários, de novo, pontuais. Eu acho que nós temos uma nova realidade em que o poder, né, a dominância pode ser efêmera, pode ser evanescente, pode ser muito curta. Ele deu exemplos de grandes iniciativas que morreram em pouco tempo. Né? Então, nós temos novos monopólios talvez de poder, ou monopólios, eu não sei como se definiria a palavra monopólio nesse mundo imaterial, porque eu não sei exatamente o que está sendo vendido, mas isso se opõe um pouco ao fato de que isso é efêmero, né? Pode sumir da noite para o dia, como várias iniciativas na internet somem, e isso pode ser visto como um alívio ou também como uma preocupação. Então, eu discordo, por exemplo, naquela tabela que ele fez entre material e imaterial, dizendo que o imaterial é eterno e o material, na verdade, é perecível. Sim, o material é perecível, mas é lentamente perecível. Ainda podemos ler hieróglifos egípcios. Está lá. Ideias talvez sejam mais perecíveis do que a matéria. Né? As coisas que acontecem no mundo imaterial tendem a assumir até as coisas que você tende a gravar, até pela tecnologia. Ninguém vai conseguir ler hoje uma fita cassete que tem um programa gravado. Já havia programas gravados em fita cassete. Ou um velho disquete. Né? Em suma, essas coisas que parecem eternas talvez sejam mais efêmeras. Então, eu vou parar por aqui só para fazer esses comentários iniciais sobre a semântica e essa história da tecnologia em busca de uma filosofia de base, ou se estamos bem do jeito que estamos.
Eu, antes de passar a palavra para o Stefano, eu imagino que haja questões a serem colocadas ao Stefano, eu tenho uma observação, é que naquela tua... há 3 termos que você usou: poder computacional, storage, armazenagem, e comunicação. Em última análise, eu estou cada vez mais convencido, e não só eu, mas a literatura, os livros que vêm sendo publicados, sobretudo nos últimos 2, 3 anos, mas isso não se limita aos livros. Você pega o Financial Times, o Guardian, o New York Times, etc. Qual é o sentido do que está... qual é o sentido do imaterial hoje? O sentido do imaterial hoje é fundamentalmente o de promover uma conexão generalizada com a finalidade de extração de dados, inclusive essa conexão generalizada, como você bem assinalou e como o teu livro explica de maneira muito didática, não é uma conexão que se faz apenas entre pessoas, mas cada vez mais uma conexão que vai abranger, que abrange e vai abranger objetos. Essa computação generalizada, o que Mark Weiser chamava de computação ubíqua, ubiquitous computing. Essa computação ubíqua, ela não pode ser vista, me parece, e essa é uma pergunta que eu te faço, como um resultado inevitável do avanço das conquistas científicas e tecnológicas ligadas à revolução digital, mas ela tem que ser vista fundamentalmente como resultado de estratégias empresariais de um punhado ínfimo de empresas que hoje são donas dessa ubiquidade. Então, eu estou muito impressionado com a leitura recente do livro que acabou de ser publicado agora, em meados de janeiro, de Shoshana Zuboff, chamado Capitalismo de Vigilância. Já há vários artigos na imprensa internacional sobre esse livro, com comparações às vezes exageradas. É a Rachel Carson da atualidade, é o Capital dos dias de hoje, etc. Agora, é um livro muito poderoso e justamente o diálogo que eu acho que esse livro pode estabelecer com o teu livro e com a tua apresentação se refere ao sentido dessa computação ubíqua e à própria noção de capitalismo de vigilância. O teu livro, ele oscila entre uma visão que você procura que não seja uma visão distópica, você é contra uma visão distópica, e ao mesmo tempo o final da tua exposição nos mostra um poder com relação ao qual nós temos muita dificuldade de saber o que nós, como cidadãos, como sociedade civil, podemos fazer. Então, a minha pergunta para você é, na qualidade de parlamentar e de um membro de comissões importantes na União Europeia tratando desse problema, nós temos que considerar que essa computação ubíqua, essa sociedade de vigilância, esse capitalismo de vigilância, é algo contra o qual nós poderemos colocar alguns poucos limites, ou é algo contra o qual nós poderemos erguer barreiras importantes que preservem a nossa capacidade, a nossa autonomia de vivermos juntos. Que é disso que se trata. Então, eu vou te passar a palavra e depois a gente passa a palavra para o público. Nós temos mais 40 minutos.
Ok, obrigado. I have to speak in English. I grab 80-90% of what you speak in Portuguese, so I think I got the idea. Well, indeed, things can change, and well, it's very nice the quotation of Kissinger. I didn't know it, and it's very, very nice. A comment about this, of course, you cannot take 100% of everything because it's almost, it's very bullish, and it's almost eternal. It says almost eternal. It depends on standards, it depends on coding. Normally, when I dig deeper in this duration part, I speak about the importance of open standards and the controlling of standards as a way to controlling part of the economy, etc. So I agree with you, and I agree with you. I feel that we need to have a significant work of thinkers and philosophers and persons thinking on these issues. But the point I'm trying to make is that if we tend to speculate much about very long-term issues, we are going to lose the focus on these kind of things that are really extremely significant and have profound impacts. And I'm coming to you, profound impact that are guided by very few people at the time. So in the book, I say, I'm not a modernist, I'm not a futurist, but I'm not a pessimist either. And things change. And things change because of the intervention of some wise people that form thoughts and then act. I usually think about antitrust regulation. Okay, antitrust is not born with humanity. It was born recently in a situation where we had the so-called robber barons, so a handful of people that control the economy, the media, the politics, etc. And in that time and in that context, Sherman and Brandeis, they came out with an idea. Imagine that we don't have antitrust today, okay? And somebody comes and goes to Mr. Bolsonaro and says, you know what? We need laws that allow us to take a company and break it into pieces. We need laws that enable us to determine the price a company must practice on their goods that provide to their clients. I mean, you could not think of a similar law being born today, but we have it, and it has proven quite effective. And and the time when it was conceived was not a time where the handful of people had a lesser degree of influence on society, on economics, and on politics. They had maybe a even larger control because they effectively were controlling the state. And nevertheless, some people came out with this, the antitrust doctrine, and it became law. So I think that things can happen and things can change. Another, and that's why in the end I'm optimistic. I try to, in italiano si dice buttare un sasso nello stagno, no? I'm trying to throw a stone in the pond just to cause some effects. In 1992, in Europe, we had the European Directive ONP, Open Network Provision. We had all state monopolies for telecommunications, and that directive said that we wanted to have competition in the telecommunications. So you could start a company, and you could compete against the state monopolist. And we posed asymmetric regulation, so to level out the field between the newborn competitors and the incumbent. Very difficult thing to think as today, but it's becoming less difficult by the day. I'm going to talk about Facebook in a second. And that eventually spurred the fact that a number of companies emerged, and there was competition, and they became the internet service providers, and then competition in the mobile phones, and a significant consumer welfare for users. I mean, it was a very good experience. That change was enabled by the progress in technology, because before that we used to have electromechanic switches. If I can change a provider, if I have to change my telephone number, I'm not going to change. I have a significant lock-in because everybody calls me with that number. And if I have to change, it's very difficult for me to update all my network and telling them, call this number instead of that one. The number portability, the fact that I can take away the identity of my line and put it into somebody else's line of a different provider is the thing that enables the competition in the telecommunication. Otherwise, we would not have this effect. You see, if you cannot port your telephone number, you stick with your current provider. Competition goes down and the monopolist keeps staying the monopolist. When you have portability and interoperability between the two providers, because if I move to a different provider and I cannot interoperate with the others, I'm not going to move. These are two parts that are needed, portability and interoperability. Portability is already there in Europe in the GDPR, in the data privacy regulation. It says that one user can take his data from one service and put it into another. We will need another part that is obligation of interoperability. Coming to Facebook. Thinking about the possibility of imposing interoperability onto Facebook, so that you can communicate with somebody that uses WhatsApp, even if you use Telegram, let's say, or Signal, or whatever application, is something that would have seemed really science fiction 1 year ago. But after all has happened with Cambridge Analytica, with the Congress testimony, etc., there is a growing movement now calling for a breakup of Facebook. And I think that it's only a matter of time. Remember, all these things that happened in the last 12 years. Let's think how the world is going to be like in 50 years. Are we going to have a single provider of interpersonal communications worldwide? We're not. As soon as, I don't know, Chinese companies become large enough to challenge the dominance of American companies, it's going to, I think that it's going to Americans themselves that are going to call for interoperability, etc. They are trying to defend a model now, but eventually there is always somebody that is growing bigger, and then you are going to ask for competition. So I think that in 50 years' time, we're going to have interoperability and portability as obvious as we have it now for mobile communications, and that is going to change significantly many of the issues that are raising from the present regulatory framework. I could talk about this for hours, so I will stop here, but if you want to ask me more details on specific points, I will.
Então, estão abertas para perguntas. Podem fazer as perguntas em português pausado. Ladislau, por favor. Professor e autor Ladislau Dalbor.
Sou Ladislau Dalbor, sou economista, professor da PUC. Eu estou trabalhando esse elemento, um texto que está aberto, digamos, na internet, chama Além do Capitalismo. Né? A ideia geral é que não é só que estamos indústria 4.0 ou coisa do gênero, ou capitalismo com mais isso e aquilo. O sistema está mudando, se deslocando radicalmente, de maneira tão profunda como foi a transição da agricultura para a indústria. Né? A indústria não eliminou a agricultura, mas passou a ser o elemento estruturante que domina a reorganização do sistema. Né? A gente se tornou brutalmente vulnerável. Né? Eu comprei um livro pela Amazon. Né? Tem um preço de intermediação da Amazon. Eu tenho minha conta no Santander. O Santander desconta o valor do livro, mas calcula o dólar a R$4. O dólar está a 3,70. Né? É mais uma mordida de 8% sobre dezenas de milhões de compras. É interessante. Afora a intermediação da Amazon e afora... Quer dizer, ao mesmo tempo, né, eu gostei muito do conceito da reintermediação, né? que abre, ao mesmo tempo, para o imenso potencial de desintermediação. O M-Pesa, né, que é o sistema de moeda direta entre as pessoas, no Quênia já são 38% do PIB. 70 países já estão aplicando. Né? O pessoal só fala Bitcoin e tal, mas na realidade a gente precisa, né, essa coisa. É espantoso, né? Na Europa, o gasto médio mensal da conta do celular é entre 7 e 9 euros, né? Não um cafezinho, enfim, certo? Vocês vejam quanto vocês pagam aqui, né? Aí diz, não, nós podemos mudar, né? Interoperability. Eu já tentei passar da Claro para Oi, da Oi para Vivo, da coisa, é rigorosamente a mesma coisa, porque eles são a plataforma interativa, eles mesmos, né? Ou seja, o conceito de trust. O que eu estou trazendo é que o meu plano de saúde, que me desconta 2 pau por mês, eu não uso 10% disso, eu estou pagando intermediários financeiros da saúde que não tem pirocas a ver com o meu interesse efetivo ou seja, a coisa está mudando radicalmente e são intermediários que não produzem porra nenhuma. Né? Porra nenhuma é um conceito heterodoxo de economia heterodoxa. Enfim, né? Eu acho muito rico, né? Fico muito feliz, enfim, com esse aporte, com vocês organizarem essa discussão, porque é vital. E eu sugeriria que a gente continuar nessa linha, né, para ir desenvolvendo essa visão desse novo sistema que está se rearticulando. Não é uma deformação do sistema anterior e brigar pelo passado, pelos direitos. Temos que evoluir para o que está sendo construído, uma proposta, digamos, metodológica. Né? Eu tenho chamado esse capitalismo de pedágio, né? Enfim, porque você paga pedágios em todas as coisas para intermediários que não pagam. Mas eu queria só sugerir esse eixo de análise. O livro está online, não? Não, eu estou perguntando se está online.
Por enquanto, não está online, vai estar online. Sim. E eu esqueci de dizer, evidentemente, o livro está à venda. Ali temos uma banca de venda. Hoje é o primeiro lançamento e amanhã será o lançamento lá no CGI.
Eu recomendo muito, tá? Porque isso facilita muito a circulação. Eu acho a discussão muito importante. E da minha experiência, você sabe que todos os meus livros estão online gratuitamente, não reduz a venda dos livros, porque o uso no papel é essencial, porque a gente é humano e gosta de ver as coisas bem, né? Não atrapalha, é complementar com uma pessoa poder puxar uma tabela, complementar o artigo, coisa do gênero. Uma sugestão.
Bom dia, meu nome é Luciana Castilho, eu sou mestranda aqui do IE. E eu tenho uma pergunta, aquela sua grande tabela que você colocou no final, todas aquelas... Essa daí, esse aí. Eu não vi nenhum comentário sobre educação e formação, porque eu acredito que também, de alguma maneira, o ecossistema passa a se retroalimentar através disso. Você passa a valorizar cursos de formação em Android, em iOS, nas linguagens que estão sendo desenvolvidas por essas tecnologias, e você cria um outro lock-in aí através da academia e da formação. Né? Eu queria saber a sua opinião sobre isso, se você concorda.
Se você puder também comentar a expressão do Tim Berners-Lee sobre a necessidade que nós temos não apenas de engenheiros, mas de filósofos engenheiros, philosophical engineers. Essa é uma expressão do Tim Berners-Lee.
Olá, eu sou a Rita, eu trabalho aqui na USP como pesquisadora e eu gostaria de lhe perguntar qual a sua opinião sobre o futuro do trabalho com a automação. Será que nós realmente estamos fadados a perder todos os nossos empregos ou ainda haverá tempo para que o ser humano domine a máquina? Obrigada.
Vamos ver se a gente consegue fazer mais uma rodada depois da resposta.
Okay, thank you very much. Ladislau. I was decided it was Ladislau or Leopoldo. I don't know why. But now I learned Ladislau. After saying it 3 times Ladislau, I cannot forget it. It's interesting that in India, last week, there was a proposal of a regulation for Amazon that's saying if you want to do the marketplace, you cannot be the seller of the products. And this is one kind of, things change, and the regulatory landscape can change significantly. Now Amazon is saying, well, maybe we are not going to invest in India, as a matter of fact. But that is always so. If you introduce a regulation that hurts somebody, that somebody would say, oh, that will drive down my investments, I will have to fire people, etc. But that's a kind of political decision politicians must take. Must weigh the things and say, okay, let's have this or let's have the other. It's a political decision. This fact that Amazon, well, I made a proposal when I was in the parliament in Italy about various areas of intervention that could be addressed in order to change things. For example, one was this separation. If you are a merchant, you cannot be at the same time merchant and intermediary both at the same time because you gather information, etc. This was one. And if you look, for example, at the 2 sanctions levied by the European DG competition against Google, the first one of 2.4 billion and the second one of 4.3 billions, were both related to the fact of being the marketplace and a player in the marketplace at the same time. We had similar regulations for banks, so I think that, for investment banking and normal banking, retail banking, so I think that that will happen sometime. India is taking the lead. I made a proposal. It was never discussed, but that could eventually happen. Another thing is, for example, auctions. If you run an auction and the service you provide is you provide the service yourself, being you who run the auctions, you don't have any kind of possible transparency. I will tell you a small story. One of my friends is the head of a tourism body in a part of Italy. And he tried auctioning a room and he paid up to $60 for the price of for promoting the room, and the room price was $60. So okay, so and he always found competition by Booking that were, when he put a bid for $13, Booking put 14. He put a bid for 50, put for 51, up to 60, and 60 was the price of the room. So it has no business sense whatsoever to promote something and spend to promote more than you will of what you will earn, because your margin. Now, how do we know that all companies, when you buy a significant amount of stuff from them, at the end of the year do rebates, they give you back part of the money? How do we know what is really the price that Booking has paid for that auction? You cannot tell. No, because I don't know if nobody can know if Booking does not have an agreement so that her dollars are valued 4 times as much as the others. Okay, so separating the retail from the marketplace is obvious. We have that for banks, etc. Separating auctions from those who run the auctions should be, in my view, should be separated from those who provide the goods. That's another part. That brings clarity, brings the possibility of auditing, etc. And this is something that it's starting to happen, as it's starting to happen in India. About disintermediation, there is a push towards disintermediation, saying that the algorithmic intermediation is not controlled by a single large entity. There are a number of conferences about decentralization of the web. The keyword is redecentralization. There is a wave of thought between Harvard to Berkeley in the States. Tim Berners-Lee is promoting his solid, and eventually this will lead, the technology will enable to make data rival and excludable. Thanks to cryptographic overlay networks, using also the blockchain, but that's minor part. Thanks to cryptographic overlay networks, we are going to be able to have, you know, we had competition in the telecommunication sector when the telephone number was separated from the line. And so the telephone number moved away from the operator and it became something of the user. This is going to happen also with data. We are going to have technology, we are having technology that enables us to separate the control of the data from the application. So to have my data that Facebook users could sit in my USB key and not in Facebook databases. Technology is enabling us this. We should look at the work of, basically, the work done by Protocol Labs. There is a paper by Juan Bennett and Nicola Greco about IPFS and Filecoin. If you're interested in these things, I think that IPFS is a technology. IPFS is a protocol suite. Effectively, there are a number of protocols that allow us to separate the control of the data from the access of the data. So you can access the data without having the control of it. This is key for all privacy-related issues and competition. You separate the number from the line. So you own your number and you decide where to put it. You own your profile and you decide where to put it, and anybody can still use it. About the oligopoly that does not work, it comes down to politics again. It's who decides who are the commissioners of the competition authority, because if the commission of the competition authority have the tools in order to break oligopolies. Oligopolies tend to happen online. Now we are talking about algorithmic collusion, because the idea that price fixing, the practice of price fixing, if I have a company, you have a company, has a company, and the three of us agree to have the same price, okay, in the material world, in the material dimension, this is sanctioned as collusion. But in the immaterial dimension, when in those cases that prices are exposed, and it's simply a scraping of the price and everybody aligns to the price. So there is some work being done by economists and competition experts on these things. I had the chance of participating to the last three World Conference of the IBA, the International Bar Association, the Association of the Lawyers Association, on competitions, and these are topics that they are discussing. But basically, presently, authorities have a significant power in order to intervene in oligopolistic situations. The things are going to get more complicated, but in the end, it all ends up to who are the commissioners of those authorities and how they are nominated, and so you come back to politics. About education and information, you are absolutely right. This is a list. I'm not going to show it tomorrow. I mean, from this, I put together a bunch of slides after talking with you before the beginning of these sessions. I have several decks. This is not part of the standard presentation, but given that I read few pages of your books in the meantime, and I heard what you said, I just put it there. This is a list that comes from a bill that I proposed, and there was not training and education in there. It's absolutely It's absolutely key, and it's a huge problem. I don't have an answer. Educating people is a very complex thing. I mean, it's very complex. And indeed, there is a word here about the fact that companies condition the development of ideas, and this is significantly true. I would prefer that ideas had sponsors attached, so that you know this idea, who is sponsoring that idea. And I spend quite a lot of time when I learn or read something, try to trace back to see who is the originator, where is the origin of that idea, and who is the one who pays that think tank or that professor, that institution, because it tells a lot, but you can rarely find the link to the money who is sponsoring the ideas. Indeed, we would need to have philosophical engineers. I didn't know this philosophers, engineers of Tim Berners-Lee. It's interesting because my girl is now exiting high school. She's going to college, and she's looking at what college to do. And I said, well, she's interested in philosophy, and she's interested in technology, but from a philosophical perspective. And I said, you should be a philosophical engineer. And I didn't know of this, of the Tim Berners-Lee, but it does not exist. So we ought to have it. Perhaps you can start here in Sao Paulo. It would be a good thing. Having 2 degrees together, a bunch of engineering and a bunch of philosophy. About the future of work. The former head of research of AI of Apple recently said that we are not going to have self-driving cars anytime soon. No, we're not going to have it, period. There is a paper came out last week or 2 weeks ago by the University of California, where they studied the effect of self-driving cars on traffic. And I mean, perhaps Sao Paulo is different, but in a large number of cities, when you need to park a car is a nightmare. And parking is more expensive than having the car going around, because fuel is less expensive than real estate. Then if I need to go to the grocery to buy things, I would just go in and let my car drive around the block until I finish. And traffic, and there is a study now that argues that commercial speed would decrease to 3 miles an hour or 8 miles an hour, etc. It's very complicated. It's very difficult to make prediction, especially on the future, and it's always difficult to make predictions on the past. But things are highly interconnected. In the book, I say that I don't trust this idea of drivers, that we are going to have less drivers because cars and trucks will drive them autonomously, and we will have robots coming down of the truck and giving the parcel to the customer. I don't think that will possibly happen. There are too many exceptions we cannot even think of. I used I'm taking this from the point of view of the self-driving cars because it's relevant, and then I will talk about the movies. But think that you are driving in Sao Paulo, and across 2 traffic lights, you see a strip of toilet paper, and you are driving. What would you do? You would drive across the toilet paper, because you see it's toilet paper, and you would drive across, and the next one would drive across. What happens is if self-driving cars sees toilet paper, a white stripe coming across the street from one traffic light to the other? It would stop, because machine learning is specialized on models, and unless you have it modeled, you cannot take action. As a precaution, you would stop. Then if you put a technology, this is to generalize, whenever you put a technology into an environment, you change that environment, and you open a space for possible vulnerabilities. Every time you put in, I had one slide that I removed, I had it to the last, that said in the Internet of Things, in the IoT acronym, the S stands for security. It's a joke because it's not there. Security is not there. It's obviously a joke. So whenever you put a system, a device into an environment, that system alters the environment and creates opportunities for things to go wrong and in unpredicted fashion. So this is what people who are very smart and are thinking about the self-driving car, perhaps we're not thinking of the fact that driving costs less than parking. But that would have an effect, and that would make, in the medium term, city mayors blocking it. So effectively saying that you cannot be in the car, if the car cannot go around alone. You need to have, but then that does not help either, because you can have somebody pay to stay aboard on the car just to go around the block because it costs less. It's very, very complicated. So the whole idea, I could tell you gazillions of examples. But the whole idea that jobs are going to be taken away, no. Then, let's think about the movies. You used to have movie rentals, you don't have them anymore. And that has been wiped away. You used to have photographers where you go and print pictures for films. It's interesting about the use of words. We talk about films, and films are not there. We used to talk about books, and we don't have books anymore. We have the text, which is something different, in the immaterial. So words are changing meaning. But then movies, we don't have movie rentals anymore. We don't have photographers printing, etc. anymore. So and it's the history of humanity that some jobs are being displaced. Those jobs that are characterized by a single task, and that task is highly repetitive and has a low degree of cognitive activity, with no need of generalization and possibility of facing a new problem to be solved, those jobs are going to be under pressure. So if the job is not that repetitive, is the level, there are many functions in the job, some of them are not repetitive. If the job needs higher level cognitive, all the functions of the job have higher level cognitive abilities. If the job needs to have the possibility of facing new problems to be solved, those kind of jobs are never going to disappear. Then those that are putting under pressure will put pressure on salaries. Because if I need to decide whether I should pay for machine, maintenance, software licenses, etc., and on the other hand, I have a low salary for a poor people, that poor people performs better because it can improvisare. Improvisar se necessita, okay. But that will put pressure on salaries. So we are going to have a problem on salaries. And that is driven by machines, etc. Well, I could go on for hours. Let me stop here.
Bem, nós estamos bem no horário que temos que terminar. Não sei se o Demi quer fazer alguma colocação.
Não, eu ia fazer um comentário curto. Eu acho que temos, às vezes, uma tendência de tentar usar, digamos, formas antigas no mundo imaterial, tentando preservar algo que vem aí. Por exemplo, essa frase aí, como manteremos os empregos? Né? Você está tentando manter uma nova situação no novo mundo. Talvez isso aí não tenha muito sentido no novo mundo, a não sei o que seja. Lembrei só de uma frase do Barlow, que era um sujeito interessante que morreu ano passado, e que ele dizia, por exemplo, que essa história de você cobrar por duplicação de uma obra de arte, você cobrar toda vez que você toca uma cantata do Bach, não acontecia na época do Bach. Na época do Bach o modelo era outro. Quando um pintor, quando o Rafael fazia um quadro, ele ganhava pelo quadro, e toda vez que eu ia tirar a fotografia do quadro, ele não ia pegar um pedaço do custo da fotografia. Quer dizer, o modelo que às vezes tentamos preservar não se sustenta no novo mundo. Eu acho que a sua abordagem do novo mundo imaterial é muito interessante, é muito boa, só que algumas coisas, de alguma forma, tentam preservar coisas que talvez não tenham mais sustentação no novo mundo.
I completely agree. I said that photographers are not there, etc. So some things completely disappear. And one more thing. I don't know how many hours are there is the national contract here in Brazil. In Italy, 8 hours, no, weekly. 40. Okay, we have 35. Okay. Well, we have, it may be more, it may be less, but 40, 35, 40. We used to have 80, 90. We are going to work less. We're going to spend more time on other things. I mean, we don't have to necessarily be adherent. But for the time being, for my working life, at least, I don't see any major difference except for pressure on salaries and reduction and eventually disappearance of some activities.
Bem, nós estamos no momento de terminar. Muito obrigado pela presença de todos. Eu queria dar 2 avisos. O primeiro é que essa nossa discussão, evidentemente, ela permeia toda a universidade, há vários grupos na universidade fazendo essa discussão. O professor José Eli e eu vamos oferecer um conjunto de seminários a partir do dia 12 de março. Isso pode ser visto no site do PROCAN, no Programa de Ciência Ambiental. Serão 5 seminários e eu vou, de certa forma, tentar dar continuidade a essa discussão, abordar, por exemplo, esse tema que Stefano, que está no livro de maneira desenvolvida, que é muito interessante, como é que nós mudamos o conflito básico da nossa sociedade em termos de apropriação do trabalho, proletários e capitalistas, e agora de onde viria o excedente, e agora de onde vem o excedente que compõe os lucros empresariais. Esse é um tema fundamental que eu pretendo abordar nas minhas exposições. E a outra informação é que também o Programa de Ciência Ambiental do Instituto de Eletrotécnica e Energia, o IEE, PROCAN IEE, nós, Rafael Zanata, Bruno Bioni, compomos um grupo chamado Ética, Tecnologia e Economias Digitais. Durante o ano passado, nós fizemos uma leitura da obra de Hans Jonas e esse ano a gente está decidindo o que fazer. Uma possibilidade é uma leitura do livro da Shoshana Zuboff, como uma espécie de um grupo de estudos, mas isso é feito no âmbito de uma atividade universitária. E ao Instituto de Estudos Avançados por receber o Stefano e, sobretudo, agradecer ao Stefano pela vinda e, enfim, para essa discussão tão proveitosa. Muito obrigado, boa tarde.